for the last few of you to log in. The room is quickly filling. So look, welcome to today's session. We are really excited to be welcoming you all today, sharing the best practice on what works and what doesn't work when it comes to creating killer sales messages on LinkedIn and also email. So we should have a full webinar room today. Looking at the attendee list, we have small and medium-sized businesses from consultancies, agencies, professional service companies, and yeah, from Hornchurch to Helsinki and from Acton to Antwerp. So we really have quite a broad audience today. So I promise it's going to be jam-packed full of value and full of content that you can take away and use into your business today. As you can see, there's 3 of us presenting for you over the next 30 to 40 minutes or so. And we are in Beckenham, Vauxhall Laura, Bradford with Alan, all from home internet connections and obviously in the middle of half-term week. So in my case, it's also before my 4-year-old's nursery time starts. So literally anything could happen, but hopefully not. So whatever happens, we'll endeavour to maximise the value that you get today and, as I say, give you practical tips. So the format we're going to be running is I will endeavour to ask the questions. So please feel free throughout the webinar to put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. And Laura and Alan will be in the main answering those for you. For those of you who've been on previous webinars we have run, whether it was the Optimize Your Profile on LinkedIn or creating conversations that convert, you'll know we'll send you a recorded version of the webinar for you after the session. And also, if you stay to the end, some bonus material that will be really useful for you. So yes, I think we're now pretty much full. So for those of you who had just joined, yes, today we're talking about writing killer sales messages on LinkedIn and email. We will be covering subject headers, testing, realistic benchmarks, client examples, which is the juicy stuff, and then practical takeaways for you to implement today. So for those of you that don't know, I'm Fergus Parker. I'm the co-founder of Pitch One to One. I set that up with Laura 2 years ago and have previously run a large marketing agency with 200 staff and of those 40 salespeople within them. But rather than my background, I'm much more excited to introduce Laura, who's my co-founder, and our guest speaker today, who is Alan. So Laura, I first worked with 14 years ago when we were selling content services to help clients with their search engine optimization and thought leadership. She has been a sales practitioner for most of that time at the very highest level, selling B2B services from retail and supermarkets to charities and membership organizations. So she is a great source of really a blended understanding of sales and content. And you know, she's worked for the biggest marketing agency at the time, which was Gyro HSR. Alan, he is our resident real content expert. I've been fortunate enough to know him for a similar amount of time, and there's not a lot that Alan hasn't done actually in the last 15 years. I first met him when he was a very young editor-in-chief in charge of 100 full-time in-house content writers across London, Leeds and Manchester. He then went on to be MD of that business that we grew and ran together. He's now a marketing consultant specializing in getting results out of content for SMEs. He really adds a business process dimension to all of his work, and really he can enable you to sort of build content marketing into the fabric of your business, ultimately to make it more efficient, sustainable, and get results. So guys, kicking it off then, and Alan, perhaps if we start with you, if that's all right. You know, today's about writing those killer sales messages. I certainly know when I was running a sales team, my sales guys always used to talk about what was the killer closing line that worked to bring that new client on board. How do you know if a message you've written is good enough? How do you even start that process?
Well, the bad news, I think, is that you don't know if it's killer until you actually test it in the field.
Yeah.
There are, of course, rules of thumb as to what you ought to write, a lot more rules about what you shouldn't write, but your instincts can be very wrong. Mine have been frequently. So you have to test. You have to get that content out there, test it against something else, and see which performs better. So the key is to start with a benchmark, and that can be how your marketing, email or online, LinkedIn has performed up until that point, or it could be something like an industry standard. I mean, if you want to take the absolute cross-sector standard for email marketing, I think an open rate is on average something between 18 and 20%. I know you guys aim much higher. I think you aim for like 40% open rates on your messaging, which is great. Or you can, look in a bit further and find out what the benchmark for your industry, for your sector is. And so you take that, and that's where you start from. That's what you are testing against. So in terms of how you would go about testing that, well, we've already mentioned the benchmark. You only want to test one hypothesis at a time. Multivariate testing is much harder and much more difficult to execute. So you carry out what's called an A/B test. You're testing one hypothesis against another hypothesis. You want that to be a significant difference, unless you're a long way into a testing program. And I think we're going to talk a lot about subject lines for messages, or the openings of LinkedIn messages, which makes sense because that is the most important part of the message. It's the bit that makes the difference, and whether anybody sees any of the rest of it. I think stats say it's about 70% of the importance of a communication lies in that opening section.
And so I guess, how do you make sure that people aren't starting from a standing start, if you like? So what you mentioned the subject line. What are the sort of basic things that we need to be talking about today to give people a chance of getting a head start on that killer sales message?
Well, on the matter of subject lines, you want to be very aware of limitations of people's devices, the devices that they're viewing things on, the way that messages appear on emails and LinkedIn, on mobile and on desktop, laptop type screens, wildly different. Different clients have different character limits of what's displayed. With mobile, it makes a difference even whether you're viewing it sort of portrait or landscape. I think studies, I noticed one from Marketo, said that the optimal character count for subject lines in emails, for example, is around about 41 or 7 words, because that kind of hits the most clients and device constraints. So really be thinking in terms of short and punchy. There is a lot of evidence as well suggesting that really short headlines, 15 characters, 2 words, get high open rates too.
And I think, and Dora, you might share some examples of what's working later down the line in terms of the short ones and the long headers. But so practically then, Laura, what does that look like, in day-to-day practice?
Yeah, so there's 2 sides to this. One is if you are sending an email using a platform, then it's relatively easy to be able to A/B test. And when I say sending through a platform, I guess people are thinking about, mass prospecting. And, I say it with a caveat that we can be very specific and put in, great variables to make it look really tailored and personalized when you are using a platform. And of course, the benefit is you've got that A/B testing built in. You'll be able to see the open rate, you'll be able to see the click-through rate, and you'll know what responses you've got. Where it gets a bit more difficult is when it is manual. So either you're sending emails one by one, or of course LinkedIn is naturally more manual. What we would advise that you do is, and I can imagine the groans from this, but basically it would be a good idea to set up a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet, here's an example of the spreadsheets that we've put together as sort of inspiration for you, but it doesn't need to be quite as complicated as this. Basically, you have the person that you've sent the message to, you have a column that says, I sent this particular message on this date, and then you've got a column that says when they replied. As long as you've got reference to the template or the style of message that you've used, you can manually A/B test. It's a little bit laborious, but actually to get started, it's a really good way to do it, because overall it'll mean that you're having to send fewer messages because you're able to optimize those messages that you do send.
Yeah. And I guess, so this looks very familiar from maybe, was it at the start we were using this? Is that right?
Yeah. We built a platform, but yeah, it's a great way for anybody listening to get started.
Okay, awesome. And then, Laura, do you have any examples that you can share? We talked about subject lines before. Anything that we can share with the audience as to what they want to be looking at and testing?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth just taking a sort of step back, because a lot of the work that, you know, I know our audience and that we do is on LinkedIn. And, you know, the same as with an email, getting the great subject line gets it opened. It's the same on LinkedIn. So when you send somebody a connection message, if they don't connect, you're never going to get a chance to deliver that killer sales message. So one of the really first things that we're looking at is how to optimize that connection. And there are various things that come into that: your photograph, your headline, and then that connection message itself. An example, looking at a client of ours, a branding agency. I know there's some agencies listening, so you might find this example quite relevant. When we first met them, they said, we know that sales is difficult, you know, really competitive brand agency selling into the largest FMCG brands in the world. And, you know, we set going with the sort of connection message that was pretty much working across the board, which was, hey, I run a networking group. Why don't we connect and you can join my group? You know, we would set up a networking group. It's not a lie, and that's a really good way to start the relationship. Now, in the case of, it was Missouri Creative, this branding agency that we're working with. I guess the marketing directors and the brand managers are getting dozens, if not hundreds, of connection messages every single day. And so you need to stand out. But not only that, they're marketers and they're savvy, and they'll appreciate the fact that you have made the effort to stand out as well. So after having a pretty poor connection rate with the networking group message, we would look to it being about a third, and it was about 14%. So we knew we had to change it up. And I've got an example of it, actually, if I can just share my screen here. Is we followed them on LinkedIn and followed their brand as well. And so instead of working with the networking group, so here's an example of the networking group message. Then we actually changed it to say, hey, I've been following you for a while, which is a bit creepy. Maybe we should just connect. And we just doubled the connection rate overnight. And so every single time, and this is actually a real lesson learned that you know, goes across loads of different instances, that you need to stand out on LinkedIn in any way that you can. And as soon as everybody starts doing messages that are a little bit similar to the ones that you're sending, then it becomes less effective. So I guess the takeaway is what works for one doesn't work for the other, but also what works at one point in time doesn't necessarily work in the future. For example, this third one here, we've done a full turnaround where the connection messages that were default were what most people were sending. So you stood out by doing something tailored, and then you stood out by saying networking group, and then because everybody sort of catches on and gets better at LinkedIn, you then are having to stand out in a different way. So we've kind of done a bit of a full circle, and we've been a bit more specific with our connection rates. So that one at the example is actually with another client example, which is, look, we're looking to improve productivity, let's connect. So it's much more specific, so people know what they're getting when they connect, and what they're getting is not a spammy sales message, which is another point.
What I really like about that message to Simon from Nick is he's not selling anything, certainly yet, but he's talking about the mission of that business, which is, I think, compelling, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, nice. So I think that there's definitely something we want to cover today, talking about the wider context around the message. So perhaps, Laura, maybe I'll come back to you on that. But Alan, do you have anything else you want to add in terms of optimizing kind of conversion? What other things can people take away now to optimize that conversion rate?
Well, I would always say lead your message, whether it's a connection request or an in-mail or an email, with a benefit. That is something that you're offering that solves a problem for the recipient. In news writing, there is this idea of the inverted pyramid. You stick the most important stuff at the top of the news story, and you work your way downwards through importance. Same here. I mean, you need to get your message across really, really early on, because if somebody isn't tempted into reading on, then they're not going to get to that information at the end. So put your benefit in there early, and remember, it's not about you; it's about what you solve for the recipient of the message. If it's a simple proposition that you're making, make your email or message short. If it's a long, complex proposition that needs explanation before somebody will click through or engage, then make it long. Short, long. It's contextual. So many of the things about what makes killer content are, as I think we've already alluded to, contextual. There are things you can control: the time you send it out, the way it looks, the way it renders, and we've already talked a little bit about that. But then there are other things that affect the individual's conversion, what landed in their inbox immediately before your message or immediately after. So all you can do is try to control what you can control, and minimize the impact of the things that you can't control. I mean, a lot of people focus on things like power words in their messaging. I don't think. I mean, I think that's okay in email context. In LinkedIn, I think people are aware of the rules of marketing, if you like. It can look really manipulative if you're talking about, it's fine in email to talk to not say cheap and to say affordable because of the negative connotations around emotional connotations around one vis-a-vis the other, but it looks manipulative if you start doing it in what is a peer-to-peer medium like a LinkedIn message. And so I think when you're talking, if you're getting into that whole psychology of words, it's better just to think about avoiding the words with negative connotations rather than trying to maximize the most positively emotional connoting words. And spam word lists for email marketers are really, really helpful in telling you what the words that are going to trigger reactions from people are going to be.
But it's also the actual spam filters themselves. So Laura, I know we've got a long list of spam words that you want to avoid just purely because it won't get through the spam filters. Could you maybe go through a couple of those just so people get an idea of the kinds of areas to avoid?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a whole set of rules around when it comes to email, spam words, of course, call, here, now, and that's where it sort of goes back to Alan's point about, maybe mentioning discuss rather than call really will get you through the spam filters. But there are other sort of practical things, which is sort of the I was going to say the boring bits, but the more practical bits about getting your sales message out, because if it never gets delivered, then it can be as great as you like. Well, what's the point? So one of the really key things that we have with email is that email is sent from an individual to another individual rather than brand to masses. Especially if you're connected to them on LinkedIn, then that's obviously going to help the open rate. But also the email domain that you're sending from, just to make sure that that is healthy, that's been checked, that the email address it's going to has been verified. Start sending to lots of bouncy emails. You're going to affect the health of your domain. Test for not just spam words, but also just do real tests. It's harder to get into the Gmail inbox than it is the Outlook inbox. So mix your tests up to include Gmail as well. And if you're finding that it is going into the non-primary inbox, that you've removed imagery, links, things like that can really affect things. Of course, once you've landed in the inbox, the subject line and that first line, as Alan said, is absolutely crucial. And I do have some examples here of subject lines that maybe the viewers might find helpful. So,
Laura, just before you move on, somebody asked a question, which was, is there a list of spam words? The one that I like to use is on, I apologize if I pronounce this incorrectly, as I have never actually said it out loud. It's snov, snov.io. There's a really good list of 500 words categorized on there. I've used that. They update it regularly. I recommend that list to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good one. And I think just on that, we've got our own internal list based on our experience of doing this tens of thousands of times. So we're happy to share that with you at the end, guys. And I think also the spreadsheet, if you are a spreadsheet person and you do want to start doing some manual testing, we're also happy to share that spreadsheet with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So going on to the sort of nitty gritty of subject lines, because I don't know, it's always something that we want to say, what is working right now? And the thing is, it's what is working right now for this particular situation. And our top performing subject for February was, are you selling like it's 1999? ? Why we believe this is working is it's specific. So anybody who's interested in improving their sales could be interested in it. It's quite light-hearted, and that seems to be working quite well in terms of subject lines. And the question mark can intrigue people to open up. So going back to the example of Missouri Creative, and we have tested quite a number of subject lines for the emails that we have been sending out on their behalf. And campaign 1, these were the top 4 performing subject lines. And to be frank, they were getting opened, and we were not getting the responses that we were wanting. So we then did a second campaign with a different set of templates. And when we started sending out these ones, then we got a sort of similar open rate, but we got a better response. And every time, even if it's only like a 1% improvement, that's another person that's seen your email. So, just keep on with those tests. Interestingly, for Missouri, where we've had the really great leads from large companies come through, it's been quite evenly balanced between a quick intro, which is very ambiguous. You're not going to know what that's about before you open it. You won't know it's a brand agency. And the other one, agency roster, which is much more specific. So I think really the takeaway from that is do mix ambiguous with specific and just see what's working best for your audience. Now, the third campaign is a different kind of campaign, and I thought just worth a mention. So they've started producing a monthly newsletter, what's been hot in the brand world this month. And what we want to achieve with that is the sort of consistency and reliability that there's going to be some great content coming through at the same time every month from Missouri. And we got a 40% open rate on this particular subject line. And because we got an open rate when it is quite clearly a sort of newsletter-led headline, because we've got these benchmarks, we know that's excellent. And actually, as the second month's newsletter is about to go out, we were actually just having a discussion, both with the client and ourselves, is do we change up this subject line? Could we get 42%? Could we get 43%? And the decision really is you want people to, they've seen the great content last month. They want to see that consistency. So we're actually going to keep it the same this time, which goes against our testing rule, just so that you get that loyalty, so people know what's coming.
And so you mentioned kind of other content or consistency of content. Perhaps this one's for you, Alan. What kind of supporting content do people need to be looking at in order to make these emails work, and in order for the whole thing to really maximise and get the best out of the campaign?
Sure. Well, cold messages, more or less cold messages, don't exist in isolation. The difference between whether I read messages that come in to me is really about what I know of the sender, how familiar I am with them, and what I've already seen from them that makes me think this is somebody worth engaging with. So when you start a sales conversation, or further back, a sort of beginning a lead nurturing conversation, you need to have that supporting content out there, because people are going to want to research you. They're going to want to research what you're talking about. They're going to want to research your company. It's best always to work on the show, don't tell principle. So if you want to demonstrate that you're a useful member of a community, don't put in your messages, I share content all the time, I'm a useful member of the community. Have been doing it before you send it out, so that people can see that you walk the walk as well as talk the talk, to use two cliches in one sentence. So having that additional stuff out there, it's not a distraction from your sales funnel. It's all about breaking down that natural caution that we have about engaging with strangers by making sure that you're not a stranger. In terms of the best content to support what you're doing with, it really depends on where during your lead nurturing process a person is. If it's early on and you want to just win a bit of trust, then it's sharing something of value. I think telling them something they don't know, pointing out an article that you think may be interesting to them, as specific to them personally, or them, the member of the segment, as you can get. But if you're further down the funnel and you're on to the conversation about us, what we do, what we can do for you, then by far the most compelling material to have out there is case studies, and even better, testimonials from your customers. There's nothing like social proof.
Yeah. And then Laura, I guess on the LinkedIn side, what kind of content specifically can we be looking at there? Any final tips?
Yeah, so one thing that's worked really well for us last week, we keep testing different value-led messages, out to 50 people. And from a pitch one-to-one perspective, one of the best value-led messages we've done is, hey, I've been having a look at your posts. I've got a few ideas if you'd like to have a chat. The response rate from that was fantastic, because it can easily lead on to a buy-in conversation, but they know that any either two-way chat or call that they have with you, they will learn more and be more knowledgeable about their posts than they were before the exchange. Similarly, people love compliments and they love talking about themselves. So another one that we've done very recently is taking that person's last post and saying, hey, great post. I feel like you could have had some more engagement. I've got some ideas if that'll help. Or great post, you got loads of engagement. Tell me how many views. And so, you know, you're not starting from an irrelevant point to then try and steer that into a buying conversation. You're going with value first in order to steer it towards, you know, oh, well, you know, what we'd recommend is this, and maybe this can help you as well. And certainly in the terms of the branding agency that I was talking about before, going back to Alan's point, we went through months of offering, you know, really valuable trends and insights for the brand, and basically showed value, started posting all the time. You know, this brand's done this, and a lot of the time actually focusing on the brands that we're targeting and saying great things about the work that they're doing, which means that 6 months down the road, when you say, would you do me a favor and introduce me to your central marketing team or your procurement department, we actually got a better response from that than we did the value-led ask, because we had shown value all the way along. And actually, just to sort of round off that story, which is a really great sort of success story, is consider who you are as a brand. And when you go out with your ask, you know, like, make it from you and people will listen. And because you've done all of this inbound stuff, when you do outbound alongside that, then your outbound is more effective. And so I think a lot of the content marketing is all inbound, but if you just wait for the leads to come, you won't get enough leads. So, you know, you do need to go out with those sales messages as well.
Amazing. So I think we are at the half an hour point, or just after. Alan, I've just had a look at the questions. There was one that we missed early on, which was talking about, were we talking about connection requests or InMail? I think we were talking about connection requests, weren't we? Not emails.
I think what Laura said applies to both.
Yeah, we might have an insight on InMail, whether to use InMail or a connection request, Laura.
Yeah, so InMails used to be more effective than they are at the moment. Basically, InMail is another form of advertising on LinkedIn. If you're going to do advertising on LinkedIn, you know, which isn't cheap, we have found that sponsoring really great, valuable content can give us more, more data and more leads, particularly in combination with a lead gen form, than using the InMail. I mean, that's just you know, our finding. I think that as soon as it's got InMail on it, people know that they're being sold to, which kind of legitimizes the selling to. So, you know, if they're in the market for that right then, you know, InMails will work. But if you're wanting to, you know, if people won't buy from one message with the kind of service or product that you offer, then you probably want to build that up with more of a nurturing program by connecting and sharing content.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, does anyone have any more questions for the people who are on the attendee list? If you've got any burning questions, now is a good time to put them in the chat box. Obviously, we've had a few already.
I'll send it on an InMail.
So, yeah, send it on an email, or you've got an email as well.
Actually, that is a really excellent point. So lots of people have LinkedIn open profiles, so you don't use up one of your InMails when you message them, so you don't have to be connected to send that. So that is definitely one of the advantages of sending messages to people you're not connected to.
A lot of people put lion in their title or description, right? I didn't understand that for quite a long time.
Yeah,
LinkedIn open networker.
Are you a lion, Alan?
I'm not, but I may be after this conversation.
I think if we don't have any more questions, I mean, to wrap up from all of our perspectives, really, it's about context. Obviously, you got to test all of these things. There is no killer message that's going to work for the next 18 months. You have to always be testing it. Context is key. What you do before that message, particularly on LinkedIn, we spend a lot of time following people, liking their content, commenting, all before, and viewing, all before the first message goes out. And then let alone the messages that go after connection, none of them actually are killer for the first between 30 and 90 days. We keep it non-salesy. So there's a whole angle there that is important to take into account. And that killer sales message typically is the last 20%, and we'll get that meeting for you or get that bit of new business. But I hope that's been useful. We've enjoyed it today, haven't we, guys? Been good?
Good fun.
We'll follow up with the couple of things that we promised. You've got the snov.io list, which is an excellent list. But we'll also give you ours as well. The spreadsheet. We've got a couple more questions coming in.
There's one about the Nordics, which I'm happy to take, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So experience of using the sort of LinkedIn and email strategies in the Nordics. What we found is that people respond better if you're not too in your face. So, a lot of the way in the UK that people get noticed is sort of popping up very regularly and staying front of mind. It's a little bit more sort of almost self-demeaning or humble in the Nordics. So the value of content comes in even more than it does in the UK. And the other thing that we found in the Nordics is that, and this will differ from industry to industry and country to country, but there can be a tendency to, you're having a nice chat on LinkedIn, to agree to a meeting without necessarily having an agenda and an objective from that. So in the UK, you pretty much don't get people agreeing to meetings unless they've already checked you out and they've got a good idea that they might like to buy from you or learn from you. Whereas in the Nordics, it's a lot more sort of networky. So which is great for the businesses that they just want to be in front of those people, building the relationship, but then other people might want to really qualify that. So you just have to be very, very specific if you're setting up a meeting that you're using your time wisely. But in general, we find connection rates are slightly higher than the UK, and actually response rates are as well. So yeah, it's a great region to use this kind of methodology in.
They're a friendly bunch, actually, aren't they? They're generally very chatty, particularly on LinkedIn. And they're very happy to refer you in if they're not the right person. So Nordics is very good. Other question we've got is, what about Australia?
We're less experienced in Australia. However, taking sort of English-speaking countries, so the US, South Africa, Australia, and actually Singapore as well, is that we do find the response rates to be slightly higher than the UK. The UK is probably one of the toughest markets. The US in particular, people are really open and really chatty. We haven't got a whole load of data from Australia, but sort of, indications are it's fairly similar to the US.
Brilliant. All right, guys, well, that brings us to the mark of 8:40, which is what I promised we wouldn't go over. So thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. We hope you got tremendous value from it. We'll follow up with what we've promised, and have a great rest of your day. Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.